Sometimes the monsters we fear most are the ones who understand our pain better than anyone else. The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's Hospital flickered against the Vermont blizzard as Dr. Elena Vasquez pulled another double shift, running on black coffee and the haunting memory of every patient she couldn't save. At 2:47 a.m., when the power died and emergency lighting bathed the corridors in an eerie red glow, she heard it, a child's voice cutting through the storm's howl. "Mama can't walk, and I think I'm dying." Elena had seen 20 years of medical emergencies, but nothing prepared her for the pale stranger who emerged from the darkness, carrying a bleeding 6-year-old girl, while her unconscious mother lay crumpled near the entrance. The man's eyes held centuries of sorrow, and when he whispered, "I can save her, but you must trust me," Elena watched him perform the impossible, healing the child's ruptured spleen with his bare hands. But healing, she would discover, always comes with a price. And sometimes the cure is more terrifying than the disease itself. What happens when a doctor sworn to preserve life discovers that saving others might cost her very soul? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The hook. The child's breathing steadied under the stranger's touch, but Elena's world had just shattered. She stood frozen in the crimson-lit hallway, her stethoscope hanging useless around her neck as she watched the impossible unfold before her. 20 years of medical training, countless nights in trauma bays, and she had never seen anything like this. The man's hands remained pressed against the little girl's abdomen, his pale fingers moving with surgical precision despite the absence of any instruments. Where moments before Elena had felt the telltale rigidity of internal bleeding, now she could see the child's color returning, her labored breathing easing into something that resembled peaceful sleep. "How?" The word escaped Elena's lips as barely a whisper. The stranger's eyes met hers across the child's still form. In the emergency lighting, his face appeared carved from marble, ageless, beautiful, and terrible in its perfection. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of unimaginable exhaustion. "Sometimes healing requires methods your textbooks never taught you, Doctor." Elena's hands trembled as she reached for her penlight, muscle memory overriding her shock. She had to examine the child, had to understand what she was seeing. The girl couldn't be more than 6 years old, with tangled blonde hair and a torn pink jacket that had been soaked with blood minutes earlier. Now, as Elena's light traced across the small torso, she found only unmarked skin beneath the fabric. "This is impossible," she breathed. She had a ruptured spleen. I could feel the internal bleeding, the distension. "She is stable now." The stranger carefully lifted the child, cradling her against his chest with infinite tenderness. "But her mother requires your expertise." Elena's gaze shifted to the woman lying motionless near the hospital's main entrance. Even from this distance, she could see the unnatural angle of the woman's legs, the way her spine curved where it should have been straight. The car accident had been devastating. She'd seen enough trauma cases to recognize the signs of severe spinal injury. "Bring the girl to Pediatric Bay 3, Elena instructed, her medical training finally overriding her bewilderment. "I'll have Nurse Matthews prepare a bed while I stabilize the mother." But when she turned back, the stranger was studying her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. His eyes seemed to pierce through her, reading something written in a language she didn't understand. "You carry great pain, Dr. Vasquez." The use of her name stopped her cold. She hadn't introduced herself. Her ID badge was turned backward, the nameplate hidden against her scrub top. "How do you—" "Pain has a scent," he said simply. "Yours is profound, recent. A child, perhaps?" Elena's breath caught in her throat. Images flashed unbidden through her mind. A hospital room much like this one, but smaller, painted in cheerful yellows and blues. A bed that had seemed enormous compared to the fragile 7-year-old girl who lay dying in it, her beautiful dark hair lost to chemotherapy, her once bright eyes dimmed by the leukemia that no amount of medical intervention could conquer. "Don't." The word came out sharp, defensive. Don't you dare." The stranger's expression softened with something that might have been compassion. "Forgive me. I meant no intrusion. But I recognize the weight you carry because I have carried something similar for a very long time." Thunder crashed outside, though Elena realized dimly that it should have been too cold for thunder in a blizzard. The emergency lights flickered, casting dancing shadows across the walls, and for a moment the stranger seemed to disappear entirely into the darkness before reappearing as the light stabilized. "Who are you?" she demanded. "Someone who understands the helplessness of watching innocents suffer," he replied. "Someone who has learned there are prices worth paying to prevent such suffering." Elena stared at him, at the impossible calmness in his features, at the way he held the sleeping child as if she weighed nothing at all. Her rational mind screamed that she should be calling security, documenting everything, demanding explanations. But her hands, her surgeon's hands that had failed when it mattered most, remembered the feeling of that child's ruptured spleen, knitting itself back together under this stranger's touch. "Take her to Bay 3, she said finally. "I'll be there once I've stabilized her mother." The stranger nodded and began walking deeper into the hospital's shadowed corridors. But just before he disappeared around the corner, he paused and looked back at her. "Dr. Vasquez," he said, and his voice carried a strange note of prophecy. "Before this night ends, you will face a choice. Remember that some opportunities come only once in a lifetime, or in my case, several lifetimes." Then he was gone, leaving Elena alone with the unconscious woman and the growing certainty that her carefully ordered world was about to change forever. Outside, the blizzard howled with renewed fury, as if the very elements were warning her to run. Instead, she knelt beside her patient and began to work. The ordinary world. Elena's hands moved with practiced efficiency as she assessed the injured woman's vitals, but her mind kept circling back to the stranger's impossible touch. The woman's pulse was weak but steady, blood pressure dropping, classic signs of spinal shock. Elena called for a backboard and cervical collar, her voice cutting through the hospital's emergency lighting with the authority of 2 decades in trauma medicine. "Possible T12L1 fracture with complete cord transection," she murmured into her recorder, falling back on the familiar rhythm of medical documentation. "Patient presents with flaccid paralysis below the waist, absent reflexes." The routine should have been comforting. This was her world. The controlled chaos of emergency medicine, where protocols and procedures provided structure against the randomness of human suffering. But as she worked to stabilize the woman's spine, Elena couldn't shake the memory of that child's miraculous healing, or the way the stranger had looked at her as if he could see straight through to the guilt she carried like a tumor in her chest. A child, perhaps? His words echoed in her mind as she supervised the woman's transport to the imaging suite. Elena had spent 3 years perfecting the art of not thinking about Sophia during work hours. The hospital had become her refuge, the only place where the ghosts couldn't follow. Here, she was Dr. Vasquez, competent, respected, needed. Here, she saved lives instead of watching them slip away, despite every desperate intervention modern medicine could offer. "Dr. Vasquez?" Nurse Matthews appeared at her elbow, clipboard in hand. "The little girl from the car accident. She's awake and asking for her mama. Vitals are completely normal. Actually, they're better than normal. I've never seen readings like these." Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm raging outside. "Where's the man who brought her in?" "What man?" Matthews frowned. "She was alone when I found her in Bay 3, sleeping peacefully, no sign of trauma." "Are you sure about the internal bleeding? Because honestly, Dr. Vasquez, this kid looks like she could run a marathon." The rational part of Elena's mind wanted to dismiss what she'd witnessed as stress-induced hallucination. She'd been pulling 18-hour shifts for weeks, covering for Dr. Henderson while he recovered from his own breakdown. The holidays were always brutal in the ER. Suicides spiked, domestic violence calls doubled, and the ghosts of Christmases past seemed to lurk in every pediatric bay. But her hands remembered the sensation of ruptured organs healing beneath her touch. Her eyes had seen impossible things. "I'll check on her," Elena said, accepting the clipboard. Has her mother been cleared for surgery yet? Dr. Morrison's reviewing the scans now. Looks like multiple vertebral fractures, but... Matthews hesitated. Dr. Vasquez, are you okay? You look pale. Elena caught her reflection in the darkened window. Hollow cheeks, dark circles under brown eyes that had seen too much. When had she started looking so much like her patients' families? When had grief carved such deep lines around her mouth? Just tired, she lied. The same response she'd been giving for 3 years. The pediatric bay was quiet except for the soft whisper of medical equipment. The little girl sat up in bed, blonde hair now clean and braided by one of the nurses. Her blue eyes were bright with the particular clarity that only belonged to children, and she smiled when Elena approached. "Hi," the girl said. "Are you the doctor who's going to fix my mama?" Elena's throat constricted. Sophia had asked similar questions during those final weeks, her faith in Elena's ability to heal absolute and heartbreaking. "Mommy's a doctor," she used to tell the other children in the oncology ward. "She'll figure out how to make the bad cells go away." "I'm Dr. Vasquez," Elena managed. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Lily Morrison. "My mama can't walk now, can she?" The directness of the question hit Elena like a physical blow. Children had an uncanny ability to cut through adult pretenses and voice the truths everyone else danced around. Sophia had done the same thing, asking Elena point blank if she was going to die just days before the end. "Your mama is very hurt," Elena said carefully, sitting on the edge of the bed. "But we're going to take good care of her. And you." Lily studied her with an intensity that seemed far too mature for 6 years old. "The nice man said you understand about losing people you love. He said that's why you work so hard to save everyone else." Elena's blood turned to ice water. What nice man, Lily? The one with the sad eyes. He made the hurt go away. Lily placed a small hand on her abdomen, exactly where Elena had felt the ruptured spleen. He said sometimes grown-ups have to make hard choices to help people. "Do you make hard choices, Dr. Vasquez?" Before Elena could answer, the lights flickered again, and somewhere in the distance, she heard the sound of breaking glass. The sound of breaking glass echoed through the hospital corridors like a gunshot, followed by the mechanical groan of the building's ventilation system grinding to a halt. Elena's hand instinctively moved to the emergency call button beside Lily's bed, but before she could press it, the lights died completely. Emergency power should have kicked in immediately. Elena had worked through dozens of power outages over the years, and the backup generators always engaged within seconds. But now, only absolute darkness pressed against them, thick and suffocating as velvet. "Dr. Vasquez?" Lily's voice remained remarkably calm in the blackness. "He said this would happen." Who said what would happen? Elena fumbled for her phone's flashlight, her medical bag, anything that might provide illumination. The familiar weight of her stethoscope around her neck felt suddenly foreign, useless. The nice man. He said the lights would go out when he needed them to. A chill crawled up Elena's spine that had nothing to do with the winter storm battering the hospital's walls. Through the darkness, she could hear distant sounds, confused voices from the nurses' station, the electronic whine of medical equipment switching to battery power, footsteps echoing in corridors that should have been lit by emergency lighting. Her phone's flashlight finally activated, casting a weak cone of blue-white light across the pediatric bay. Lily sat cross-legged on the hospital bed, her small hands folded in her lap, looking for all the world like she was waiting for something. "Lily, I need you to listen to me very carefully," Elena said, keeping her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. "We're going to walk to the nurses' station together, okay? I'm going to hold your hand, and we're going to—" "He's coming," Lily interrupted, tilting her head as if listening to something Elena couldn't hear. "He wants to show you something important." The temperature in the room dropped so suddenly that Elena's breath began to mist. Her phone's light flickered once, twice, then died completely, plunging them back into darkness so absolute it felt like being buried alive. "Elena." The voice came from directly behind her, though she was certain no one had entered the room. Elena spun around, her heart hammering against her ribs, and found herself face to face with the stranger from the hallway. In the impossible darkness, he seemed to generate his own faint luminescence, his pale skin glowing with an otherworldly light that made her think of moonlight on fresh snow. "You," she breathed. "The hospital's generators have been disabled," he said, and Elena noticed he didn't seem to be breathing at all. His chest remained perfectly still as he spoke. "The storm is strengthening. Your ambulance services are suspended. For the next several hours, you and your patients are completely isolated." Elena took a protective step closer to Lily's bed. "What do you want?" Instead of answering, the stranger moved to the window overlooking the hospital's parking lot. With a gesture that seemed almost casual, he drew back the curtains, revealing a vista that made Elena's blood freeze. The parking lot had become a battlefield. Emergency vehicles sat abandoned in growing drifts of snow, their red and blue lights still flashing weakly through the storm. But scattered between them were dark shapes that her mind initially tried to interpret as debris blown by the wind. Then one of the shapes moved, and Elena realized with dawning horror that they were people, or things that had once been people. They stumbled through the snow with the jerky, unnatural movements of marionettes controlled by a drunk puppeteer. Their clothes were torn, their faces pale as bone in the emergency lighting that still functioned outside the building. And when one of them turned toward the hospital, Elena saw eyes that reflected the storm's lightning like an animal's. "What are they?" Elena whispered. "Hungry," the stranger replied simply. "And they know this place is full of warm blood." As if responding to his words, the creatures outside began moving with more purpose, shambling toward the hospital's entrances with increasing urgency. Elena could hear them now, scratching at doors, testing windows, their voices carrying on the wind like the cries of lost children. "The power grid failure wasn't an accident," the stranger continued, turning back to face her. His eyes held depths that seemed to stretch back centuries. "Something is hunting in this storm, Elena. Something that feeds on weakness and desperation. Your patients, your staff, that child's paralyzed mother, they're all prey now." Elena's medical training screamed at her to run, to evacuate, to follow every protocol she'd ever learned for hospital emergencies. But her feet remained frozen to the floor as the full implications of what she was seeing crashed over her. "The phone lines are down," she said numbly. "The radio equipment runs off the main power grid. We can't call for help." "No," the stranger agreed. "You cannot." From somewhere in the hospital's depths came the sound of breaking glass, closer, this time, more deliberate. The creatures were getting inside. The stranger stepped forward, extending one pale hand toward Elena. "But I can offer you a choice, Dr. Vasquez. The power to protect everyone in this building. The strength to ensure no one else dies on your watch ever again." Elena stared at his outstretched hand, remembering the impossible healing she'd witnessed, the child's ruptured organs mending under his touch. What kind of choice? His smile was beautiful and terrible, the kind that changes everything. Elena stared at the outstretched hand, her breath coming in sharp bursts that misted in the suddenly frigid air. The sound of breaking glass echoed again from somewhere deeper in the hospital, followed by a scream that cut off abruptly. Her patients were scattered throughout the building, the elderly man with chest pain in cardiac bay 2, the pregnant woman experiencing contractions in obstetrics, Lily's paralyzed mother somewhere in imaging, all of them helpless, all of them depending on her. "What are you?" she whispered, taking an involuntary step backward. The stranger's hand remained extended, steady as carved marble. "Someone who has walked a very long path to stand in this room with you, Elena. Someone who recognizes the weight of responsibility you carry." Another crash, closer now. Through the window, she could see more of those shambling figures emerging from the storm, their movements becoming increasingly coordinated as they surrounded the building. One pressed its face against the glass, leaving a smear of something dark and viscous. Its mouth opened in a soundless howl, revealing teeth that gleamed like broken china. "The heating system will fail within the hour," the stranger continued, his voice maintaining that preternatural calm. Your backup power supplies will last perhaps 2 hours more. Those creatures can wait. They have infinite patience. But your patience, the elderly woman in room 12 with chronic heart failure, the premature infant in the NICU whose incubator is already running on battery power. Elena's mind raced through the calculations. Without heat, without power, the most vulnerable patients would begin dying within hours. The elderly, the very young, those already weakened by illness or injury. She thought of Mrs. Chen, who'd been admitted that afternoon with pneumonia, her immune system already compromised. Of baby Marcus, born 6 weeks early and fighting for every breath. Of Sophia, who had died despite every advantage modern medicine could provide. "You're talking about making me like you," Elena said, her voice barely audible over the wind. "Aren't you?" The stranger's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those ancient eyes. Approval, perhaps, that she understood without lengthy explanation. Yes. The simple admission hit her like a physical blow. Elena had read enough folklore, watched enough movies, consumed enough popular culture to understand what he was offering. Immortality, supernatural strength, the power to heal with a touch, to move through darkness like it was daylight, to face down whatever monstrosities waited in the storm. And the price. "I'd have to feed on people," she said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "Human blood. Eventually, yes. I'd lose my humanity, my soul." "That," the stranger said softly, "is a matter of perspective. What is humanity worth if it means watching innocents die when you have the power to save them?" Elena's hands trembled as images cascaded through her mind, not just of Sophia's final moments, but of every patient she'd lost over 20 years of emergency medicine. The teenager who'd overdosed on fentanyl, dead before the ambulance reached the hospital. The construction worker who'd bled out from a severed artery because they couldn't get him to surgery fast enough. The young mother who'd suffered an aneurysm during what should have been a routine procedure. All the times she'd stood in hallways like this one, delivering news that shattered families. All the times she'd felt the particular helplessness that came with being human, limited, bound by the constraints of mortal flesh and finite knowledge. "Dr. Vasquez?" Lily's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. The little girl had moved to the edge of the bed, her blue eyes luminous in the darkness. "My mama's scared. She doesn't understand why she can't feel her legs." Elena's throat constricted. She knelt beside the bed, taking Lily's small hand in both of hers. The child's skin was warm, alive, trusting. Everything Elena had sworn an oath to protect. "I know, sweetheart. I know she's scared. But you could fix her, couldn't you?" Lily's gaze moved meaningfully toward the stranger. "If you were strong enough." The question pierced Elena's defenses like a blade between ribs. She thought of the woman lying somewhere in the hospital's depths, paralyzed from the waist down, facing a lifetime of disability. With conventional medicine, Elena could stabilize her, manage her pain, help her adapt to her new reality. But she couldn't give her back the ability to walk, couldn't restore what the accident had taken. Unless... "The transformation isn't without cost," the stranger said, reading her thoughts with uncomfortable accuracy. "You would gain much, but you would also lose much. The sunrise would become your enemy. Holy ground would burn your feet. And yes, eventually, you would need to feed on human blood to survive." "How long?" Elena asked, hating herself for even considering it. "How long before I'd have to—" "With discipline? Months. Perhaps longer. And there are ways to minimize harm. Those near death, criminals, those who prey on the innocent." His eyes hardened. The choice of whom to feed upon would remain yours. Another scream echoed from the hospital's depths, followed by the sound of splintering wood. Whatever was outside had found a way in. Elena stared at the stranger's pale hand, still extended toward her in the darkness, and felt the weight of every life hanging in the balance. Elena's fingers hovered inches from the stranger's outstretched hand, and in that suspended moment, she felt the weight of every choice that had led her to this precipice. The sound of splintering wood echoed through the hospital corridors again, closer now, accompanied by inhuman snarls that made her blood freeze. "They're inside," she whispered. "Yes." The stranger's voice carried no emotion, only certainty. "The east entrance. They'll reach the first patient rooms within minutes." Elena closed her eyes and saw Sophia's face during those final hours. Pale, trusting, asking why the medicine wasn't working anymore. She'd been Elena's whole world, the reason for everything, and Elena had failed her with all the resources of modern medicine at her disposal. How many more would die tonight while she clung to her humanity like a security blanket? From the corridor came the sound of footsteps. Wrong footsteps, too slow and shuffling to belong to any living person she knew. A wet, dragging noise followed, as if something was being pulled across the linoleum floor. "Mrs. Chen," Elena breathed, thinking of the elderly woman with pneumonia. "She's in room 7. She can barely walk." "Not anymore, she can't," the stranger said softly. "But you could reach her. You could save her. All of them." Elena's hand trembled as she extended it toward his. The rational part of her mind screamed warnings. This was insane, impossible, a violation of everything she'd sworn to uphold as a physician. First, do no harm. But what constituted harm when the alternative was watching everyone under her care die in the darkness? "If I do this," she said, her voice barely audible, "will I still be me?" "That depends entirely on what choices you make afterward." His fingers were cold as winter stone when they brushed against hers. "Power corrupts only those who allow it to. You've spent 20 years choosing to heal rather than harm. That won't change unless you choose to change it." A scream pierced the air, high, terrified, utterly human. It came from the direction of the cardiac unit, where Mr. Rodriguez was recovering from his heart attack. Elena jerked her hand back as if the stranger's touch had burned her. "He's dying," she whispered. "Right now, he's dying, and I'm standing here talking while—" "Then choose," the stranger interrupted, his eyes blazing with ancient intensity. "Choose whether you'll spend another night counting the dead, or whether you'll finally have the power to tip the scales." Elena thought of every night shift that had ended with her washing blood from her hands, every family she'd had to face with news that would haunt them forever. She thought of the oath she'd taken, to preserve life, to relieve suffering, to do no harm. But what was harmful about accepting the power to actually save people instead of just delaying their inevitable deaths? Another scream cut through the darkness, this one from the pediatric wing. Elena's resolve crystallized like ice forming on a window. "Do it," she said, grasping his hand firmly. "Whatever you have to do, do it." The stranger's grip tightened, and Elena felt a sensation like electricity flowing through her bones. His other hand moved to cup the back of her neck, drawing her closer with gentle but irresistible strength. "This will hurt," he warned, his breath cold against her throat. "But on the other side of that pain lies more power than you've ever imagined." Elena nodded, her eyes finding Lily's across the darkened room. The little girl watched with preternatural calm, as if she'd known all along this moment would come. "Take care of them," Elena whispered. "All of them." "We will," the stranger replied, and Elena felt the sharp pressure of teeth against her neck. The pain hit like lightning, searing through every nerve ending in her body. But beneath the agony was something else, a rushing sensation, as if doors she'd never known existed were being thrown open inside her mind. Her vision exploded with impossible clarity, showing her heat signatures through the hospital walls, the frantic beating of human hearts, the cold emptiness where the creatures stalked through the corridors. She could see Mrs. Chen cowering in her room as something terrible scratched at her door, could see Mr. Rodriguez struggling to breathe as his heart fought against the terror flooding his system, could see Lily's mother lying paralyzed and helpless 3 floors down, tears streaming down her face as inhuman howls echoed through the air vents. All of them depending on her, all of them waiting to be saved. Elena felt her old life draining away with her blood, flowing out into the darkness like water from a broken dam. But what rushed in to replace it was intoxicating, strength beyond measure, speed that could outpace thought, senses that could perceive reality in ways her human mind had never imagined. When the stranger finally pulled away, Elena Vasquez, the mortal woman, was gone. What stood in her place smiled in the darkness, already moving toward the door. The corridor stretched before Elena like a tunnel carved from shadow and fluorescent death. Her enhanced senses painted the hospital in impossible detail. She could smell the copper tang of spilled blood from 3 rooms away, hear the ragged breathing of terrified patients through solid walls, feel the vibrations of inhuman footsteps through the floor like a spider sensing tremors in its web. But most startling was the silence of her own existence. No heartbeat thundered in her ears, no breath misted in the frigid air. She had become a creature of perfect stillness, death animated by purpose. "The transformation takes time to settle," Victor said beside her. She somehow knew his name now, as if the knowledge had been transferred with his blood. "You'll feel disoriented at first. Trust your instincts." A wet, snarling sound echoed from the direction of the cardiac unit, followed by a crash that made the walls vibrate. Elena moved without thinking, her body flowing through the darkness with impossible grace. She reached room 7 in seconds, finding Mrs. Chen pressed against the far wall, her oxygen cannula torn away, blood trickling from scratches on her arms. The thing crouched between them bore only a passing resemblance to humanity. Its flesh hung in grey tatters, and when it turned toward Elena, she saw intelligence burning in its sunken eyes. Not the mindless hunger she'd expected, but calculating malice. "Another one," it hissed, voice like grinding bone. Freshly turned, still warm with human weakness, Elena felt her lips pull back in what might have been a smile. Wrong. She moved faster than thought, her hands closing around the creature's throat with strength that surprised even her. Its bones crumpled like dry kindling, and she hurled it through the reinforced window with casual violence. The thing's scream dopplered away into the storm. Mrs. Chen stared at her with wide, terrified eyes. "Dr. Vasquez? What? How did you—" "Stay here," Elena said, her voice carrying new harmonics that seemed to resonate in the air itself. "Don't leave this room until morning." The elderly woman nodded mutely, and Elena realized with a start that she'd just used some form of supernatural compulsion. The knowledge should have horrified her, but instead she felt only satisfaction. Mrs. Chen would be safe now. More crashes echoed through the hospital as Elena raced toward the cardiac unit. Her enhanced hearing picked up Mr. Rodriguez's labored breathing, the arrhythmic stuttering of his damaged heart. Too slow, she was still too slow. "There are rules you must understand." Victor's voice reached her from somewhere behind, though she didn't pause to look back. "The creatures hunting tonight are ghouls, created by necromantic magic, not born of any natural vampiric line. They're stronger than humans, but far weaker than you. However, their creator—" Elena rounded the corner to find 3 ghouls surrounding Mr. Rodriguez's bed. The elderly man clutched his chest, his monitor showing the chaotic spikes of cardiac arrest. One of the creatures held a syringe filled with something that definitely wasn't medicine. "That's far enough," a new voice said from the shadows. A woman stepped into view, tall, elegant, wearing a coat that should have been soaked from the storm but appeared perfectly dry. Her eyes held the same ancient depths as Victor's, but where his radiated controlled power, hers burned with sadistic amusement. "I was wondering when the hospital's new guardian would show herself." Elena felt Victor arrive beside her, his presence radiating tension. "Morgana, I should have known." "Dear Victor," the woman purred. "Still playing hero after all these centuries? And now you've made yourself a protégé." Her gaze fixed on Elena with predatory intensity. "Tell me, little doctor, was the price of power worth abandoning your precious human morality?" "I haven't abandoned anything," Elena said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "I've simply acquired better tools." Morgana laughed, a sound like crystal breaking. "How delightfully naive. Do you know what I am, child? Something that needs to be removed from my hospital." "Your hospital?" Morgana's eyebrows rose mockingly. "Such territorialism, and you've been turned for all of 10 minutes. I am a necromancer, little doctor. I create armies of the dead for pleasure. These ghouls are merely tonight's entertainment." Elena glanced at Mr. Rodriguez, whose heart monitor showed increasingly erratic patterns. Every second of delay brought him closer to death, the kind of death she now had the power to prevent. "Victor," she said quietly, never taking her eyes off Morgana. "The rules, what are they?" "Sunlight will destroy you. Holy water burns. Wooden stakes through the heart are fatal," he replied tersely. "But your greatest vulnerability is your humanity. Guard it carefully. It's both your weakness and your strength. And her." Elena nodded toward Morgana. Ancient, powerful, completely insane. Morgana clapped her hands in mock delight. "Such flattery. Now, shall we discuss terms? I'm prepared to spare your patience in exchange for—" Elena moved before the necromancer could finish speaking, her newfound speed carrying her across the room like liquid lightning. She had patience to save and rules to learn. Starting now. Elena's strike never landed. Morgana dissolved into shadow the instant before Elena's fist would have connected, reforming 3 feet to the left with that crystalline laugh echoing off the walls. The ghouls moved in perfect synchronization, their claws extending toward Mr. Rodriguez as the heart monitor's alarms screamed into the darkness. "Too eager," Morgana chided, wagging a finger like a disappointed teacher. "Power without strategy is just destruction in prettier packaging." Elena spun toward the nearest ghoul, but Victor's hand caught her shoulder. "Wait," he said, his voice carrying absolute authority. "Look." Elena forced herself to stop, to truly see what was happening. The ghouls weren't attacking randomly. They were positioning themselves at specific points around the room. The one with the syringe held it poised over Mr. Rodriguez's foreline, while the others flanked the bed at precise angles. Their eyes never left Morgana, waiting for some signal. "A demonstration," Morgana explained pleasantly. "Your patient here has perhaps 30 seconds before complete cardiac failure. My servants can inject a stimulant that will stabilize him, temporarily, or they can inject something far more interesting. The choice depends entirely on how reasonable you're willing to be." Elena's enhanced senses showed her everything with terrible clarity. Mr. Rodriguez's increasingly erratic heartbeat, the thin sheen of sweat covering his gray skin, the way his fingers clutched at the sheets with diminishing strength. She could save him. She had the speed now, the strength to tear through the ghouls before they could act. But Morgana was watching her with the patience of a predator who knew the trap was already sprung. "What do you want?" Elena asked, hating the words even as she spoke them. "A conversation. Nothing more." Morgana gestured gracefully, and the ghoul with the syringe pulled back slightly. Not enough to eliminate the threat, but enough to show good faith. "I'm curious about Victor's newest protégé. It's been decades since he turned anyone." "Elena," Victor warned quietly. "She's buying time. The longer we remain here, the more patients die elsewhere." "Yes," Morgana finished. "I can hear them too, you know. Mrs. Patterson in the ICU is developing pulmonary edema. Baby Marcus in the NICU has perhaps 10 minutes before his oxygen runs out. Tick-tock, little doctor." Elena felt her newfound composure fracturing. She could be everywhere at once. That was the terrible irony. With her enhanced speed, she could reach every room, save every patient, but only if she could move freely. Morgana had turned the hospital's layout into a chessboard, and Elena was discovering that raw power meant nothing when her opponents controlled the game. What kind of conversation? Elena forced herself to ask. The philosophical kind. Morgana began pacing around the room, her movements liquid and hypnotic. "Tell me, what did you feel when you let Victor drain your humanity away? Relief? Exhilaration? The intoxicating rush of finally having enough power to matter?" Elena remembered the moment of transformation, the sensation of doors opening in her mind, of limitations falling away like shed skin. But underneath those memories was something else, the look in Lily's eyes as she'd watched from the hospital bed, trusting and unafraid. "I felt like I could finally do my job properly," Elena said. "Ah, but that's not your job anymore, is it?" Morgana's smile was razor-sharp. "You're no longer bound by medical ethics or hospital policies or insurance regulations. You're no longer limited by human frailty or the laws of physics. You could walk into any pharmaceutical company's boardroom and persuade them to give away their patents. You could visit every politician who's voted against healthcare funding and adjust their perspectives. You could reshape the entire medical system with nothing but time and influence. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the hospital's failing heat, because part of her, a growing part, found the suggestion intoxicating. "That's not healing," Victor said sharply. "That's dominion." "Is it?" Morgana turned her attention to him and kept the ghouls positioned around Mr. Rodriguez. "How many people die every day from treatable diseases because they can't afford treatment? How many suffer because of human greed and short-sightedness? Elena could fix all of that, given time." Mr. Rodriguez's monitor showed another dangerous spike, and Elena's hands clenched into fists. "Let me stabilize him," she said through gritted teeth. "Then we can discuss philosophy." "But the philosophy is the point," Morgana replied. "You see, I've been watching this hospital for weeks. I know about your daughter, Elena. About Sophia. About how she died despite having access to the best medical care money could buy." Elena went absolutely still. Even Victor stepped back from the sudden aura of menace radiating from her transformed frame. "Choose your next words very carefully," Elena whispered, her voice carrying harmonics that made the windows vibrate. Morgana's smile widened, showing teeth like polished pearls. "The question, my dear, is what you're prepared to become to ensure it never happens again." The mention of Sophia's name hit Elena like a physical blow, but instead of breaking her concentration, it crystallized everything into perfect, terrible clarity. The grief she'd carried for 3 years transformed into something far more dangerous, purpose backed by supernatural power and a mother's unending rage. "You want to know what I'm prepared to become?" Elena's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow filled the entire room. "Let me show you." She moved with inhuman speed, but this time with calculated precision instead of raw emotion. Her first strike took out the ghoul nearest the door, her enhanced strength reducing it to ash before it could even scream. The second fell as she spun, her hand punching through its chest with surgical accuracy. But the third, the one holding the syringe, had been waiting for exactly this moment. Predictable, Morgana laughed as the ghoul's thumb pressed down on the plunger. "Did you really think I'd bring weapons I couldn't use?" Elena watched in horror as dark liquid flowed into Mr. Rodriguez's foreline. Not a stimulant, not poison, something else entirely. The man's eyes snapped open, completely lucid for the first time since his heart attack, but when he looked at Elena, his pupils were solid black. "What did you give him?" Elena demanded. "A choice," Morgana replied. "He can die as planned from cardiac arrest, or he can accept my gift and live forever. But here's the interesting part. The transformation requires a catalyst. Specifically, it requires the blood of whoever he trusts most in this moment." Elena felt Victor's hand on her shoulder, urgent and warning. "Don't," he said. "What she's suggesting, it's an abomination. A forced turning never creates a true vampire. It creates something hungry and mindless. But alive," Morgana pointed out reasonably. "Isn't that what matters most to our dear doctor? Keeping her patients breathing?" Mr. Rodriguez's monitor shrieked as his heart rate spiked beyond anything medically sustainable. His hand reached out toward Elena with desperate need, his blackened eyes pleading. "Please," he gasped, his voice distorted by whatever was coursing through his system. I don't want to die. My granddaughter, she's only 5. Who's going to read to her?" Elena's enhanced hearing picked up the sound of his heart literally tearing itself apart, each beat weaker than the last. In 30 seconds, maybe less, it would stop entirely. She could give him her blood and save his life, but create a monster in the process. Or she could honor his humanity and watch him die. Everything she'd learned about her new nature crystallized into this single, impossible moment. The power Victor had given her wasn't just physical. It was the terrible responsibility of deciding who lived and who died based on her own moral calculations. "This is the ordeal, isn't it?" Elena said, her eyes finding Victor's in the darkness. "Not just learning to be a vampire. Learning to carry the weight of these choices. Yes, he replied simply. This is what I tried to warn you about. Power without wisdom is just another form of disease. Morgana clapped her hands together in delight. Oh, this is delicious. Tell me, Elena, when your precious Sophia was dying, if someone had offered you this same choice, would you have taken it? Would you have damned your daughter's soul to keep her body alive? The memory hit Elena with devastating force. Sophia's final night, her small hand growing cold despite the heated blanket, her voice barely a whisper as she asked if it would hurt. Elena had held her daughter as the cancer finally won, had felt the exact moment when breathing stopped and life slipped away into whatever came after. She'd wanted to scream, to rage against the unfairness of watching a 6-year-old die while drug dealers and murderers live to old age. She'd wanted to trade places, to offer her own life in exchange for her daughter's. She'd wanted power, any kind of power, that could tip the cosmic scales toward justice. But she'd also known, even in that moment of ultimate grief, that forcing Sophia to stay in a body that had become nothing but pain would have been cruelty disguised as love. I would have let her go, Elena said quietly, the admission tearing something loose inside her chest. Because keeping someone alive isn't the same thing as saving them. Mr. Rodriguez's hand fell back to the bedsheet as his heart monitor flatlined. In the sudden silence, Elena felt the weight of her choice settle into her bones like lead. She had the power to resurrect him even now. Victor's blood had made many things possible that had never been possible before. But having power and using it were two very different things. Fascinating, Morgana said, though her voice carried disappointment rather than approval. And here I thought motherhood would have taught you about the value of pragmatic compromise. Elena turned toward the necromancer with predatory focus. Grief transforming into something far more dangerous. It did. It taught me that love sometimes means letting go. And what, Morgana asked with renewed interest, does it mean for the living? The question hung in the air like a blade, and Elena felt the full weight of Morgana's trap closing around her. Because the necromancer was right. There were still living patients throughout the hospital, and every second spent in philosophical debate brought them closer to preventable deaths. It means I don't have time for your games, Elena said, but even as the words left her mouth, she heard the hollowness in them. Mr. Rodriguez's body lay cooling between them, a testament to the limits of her newfound principles. Morgana's laugh was silk over broken glass. Oh, but you do have time. All the time in the world, in fact. That's rather the point of immortality. She gestured toward the flatlined monitor. Poor Mr. Rodriguez there? He had a granddaughter named Isabella. 5 years old, as he mentioned. Leukemia, just like your Sophia. Early stages still, completely treatable with the right intervention. Elena's enhanced hearing caught the sound of Victor's sharp intake of breath, but she couldn't look away from Morgana's knowing smile. The necromancer continued with casual cruelty, of course, without her grandfather's insurance coverage. Well, public health care in rural Vermont is notoriously underfunded. You're lying, Elena whispered, but her supernatural senses were already confirming the truth in Morgana's heartbeat, her scent, the micro-expressions that flitted across her ancient features. I never lie about cancer, Morgana replied. It's such an unimaginative way to kill people. Mr. Rodriguez was the girl's legal guardian. Her parents died in the same accident that damaged his heart. Without him, she becomes a ward of the state. Do you know what the survival rates are for childhood leukemia patients in the Vermont foster system? Elena felt something fundamental breaking inside her chest. Not her ribs, not her sternum, but the careful architecture of justification she'd built around her choice. Mr. Rodriguez hadn't just been a patient. He'd been a 5-year-old girl's last hope for survival, and Elena had watched him die in the name of preserving his humanity. This is what you wanted, Victor said quietly. His words aimed at Morgana, but his eyes fixed on Elena with growing concern. You orchestrated this entire scenario. Guilty as charged, Morgana admitted cheerfully. Though I must confess, I expected our dear doctor to make the more selfish choice. Creating monsters is so much more entertaining than witnessing noble sacrifice. Her expression turned predatory. But we're not finished yet, are we? Because there are still patients dying throughout this hospital, and Elena here has learned something very important about the cost of moral purity. As if summoned by her words, Elena's enhanced hearing picked up the desperate sounds echoing through the building, Mrs. Patterson's labored breathing as fluid filled her lungs, baby Marcus's increasingly irregular heartbeat as his oxygen supply dwindled, the soft moans of patients whose pain medications had run out when the power failed. Each sound was a weight added to the scales of her conscience, and Elena realized with crystalline horror that Morgana had turned her greatest strength, her ability to save everyone, into her most exquisite torture. "You could still bring him back," the necromancer suggested, nodding toward Mr. Rodriguez's still form. "One small bite, one moment of compromise, and Isabella gets to keep her grandfather. The monster you create will be manageable. Victor and I could contain it afterward. A small price for a child's life, don't you think?" Elena looked at Mr. Rodriguez's peaceful face, then at Victor's expression of absolute despair. He knew what she was thinking, could probably smell the conflict radiating from her transformed body like pheromones. "You do this," Victor said softly. "There will be no going back. Not from the act itself, but from the knowledge of what you're willing to become. Every future choice will be measured against this moment. And if I don't?" Elena's voice cracked with the weight of accumulated loss. "How many Isabella Rodriguezes die because I chose philosophical purity over practical salvation?" Morgana began to circle them again, her movements hypnotic and terrible. "The beautiful thing about immortality, dear Elena, is that you'll have eternity to find out. Every newspaper obituary, every childhood cancer ward you pass, every grieving parent, you'll wonder if your principles were worth their suffering." Elena felt her carefully constructed sense of purpose crumbling like ancient stone. She'd thought transformation would give her the power to heal without compromise, but instead it had revealed the impossible weight of omnipotent responsibility. Every choice carried infinite consequences, every decision created ripples that would drown innocence she'd never even meet. The monitor's flatline continued its electronic dirge, and Elena realized that Morgana had succeeded beyond her wildest expectations. She hadn't just defeated Elena's body, or even her plans. She'd shattered the fundamental belief that had driven Elena to accept Victor's gift in the first place. In trying to become powerful enough to save everyone, Elena had discovered that true power meant accepting that someone, somewhere, would always be beyond salvation. And that knowledge felt like dying from the inside out.